Hello, welcome to Light from Above. My name is David Kenny. Glad you could watch the program. Today we're talking about a very familiar story. The time happened probably when the Babylonian Empire fell and the Medo-Persian Empire rose to power, and it relates to the story of Daniel. Daniel and the lion's den, which you could read about in Daniel chapter 6. Very familiar story to so many. We've told these stories to our children. We were told these stories when we were children, and we need to keep telling these stories to our children. But I want you to think about this story as we talk about today, how important it is for us as adults to not forget what Daniel did, what he went through, and how these lessons are not just for kids, they're for grown-up kids, they're for adults as well. A lot of things happened to Daniel. He was carried into captivity. His name was changed. He was instructed in the ways of Babylon. The empires changed. There was, some conflict there, but he never lost his conviction and his allegiance with Jehovah, with God. Never lost that. Sometimes, people, they'll quit. They'll quit Christianity over something that really, compared to some of these things, really pale in comparison. But when we look at Daniel chapter 6 in the lion's den, I want you to think about Daniel. He was successful, and because of that, in the first 3 verses of Daniel 6, you see his elevation there. Darius had organized a government under 120 satraps over the nation. A satrap was a governor or prince, and each one of those, there's 3 of them that were higher than the others, and Daniel was one of them. And Daniel was significant. Matter of fact, in verse 3 it says, "Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and the satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm." And notice, he didn't gripe, he didn't complain, he didn't do any of that stuff. But Darius was shrewd enough to realize, this Daniel's really good. This Daniel, I could benefit from him, and he can help me. Now, what kind of influence would Daniel have? Interesting, in Proverbs 22:29. It says, "Do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before unknown men." You probably have heard the expression, nothing succeeds like success. And Daniel does that. He succeeds. He's successful. But you know what? There were some people, they didn't like that. And we should not be surprised when people don't like it when we succeed. Notice in verses 4 through 5 that jealousy creeps into the equation. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 12:15, "Rejoice with those who rejoice," but not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody wants to do that. Sometimes people, they resent people's elevation. You might think, well, their elevation, how about their promotion? Sometimes people will resent it. The other 2 presidents, the other 2 besides Daniel, they probably thought something like this: that Daniel has got to go. He's got to go. We got to get rid of him. We have got to find something that we can use to discredit him and to get him out of the way. But notice what it says in Daniel 6 verse 4, "But they could not find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him." Well, they can't really do anything about that, can they? No, they can't. Matter of fact, they try, and they decide, there's only one thing we can do. We can only find fault with him in connection to his religion. Matter of fact, it says there, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God." So what do? They set a trap. That's what they do. They set a trap for him in Daniel 6 through 9. Schemers are going to scheme, right? Now, you've heard that kind of a thing. Haters are going to hate, schemers are going to scheme. People do that kind of thing. So the 2 presidents and the satraps approached the king about creating a royal statute and making a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast in the den of lions, Daniel 6 and verse 7. They're setting this trap. That's what they're after. And Darius did not realize that Daniel was the target of it, apparently. Or he never would have done it, but he does. And wanting to make sure that Daniel cannot be sprung from the trap, they say there in verse 8, established a decree and signed the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. That was sort of an interesting thing about the Medes and the Persians. Now, we sort of live in a different world, but back then, king, he could change wherever he wants. It's good to be the king and do whatever you want, however you want, whenever you want. It wasn't that way in the Medo-Persian Empire. If the king made a decree, that law stood, and he wasn't allowed just to change it on a whim. Now, that's the way it worked. And they knew that, and they used that to their advantage. Perhaps Darius would have given much more thought about the matter if he would have asked more questions about why do you want this decree? Sometimes it's a good idea whenever somebody comes to you with this idea and you're like, they may phrase it in such a way that sounds really good to you. But you may, in the back of your mind, you may want to ask this question, and you might actually want to ask some follow-up questions. But you may want to say, why are they coming up with this idea? I mean, what's the reason behind that they would want to do this? And maybe if Darius would have done that, maybe he would have seen through it, maybe a little quicker. So they pass it, and you know what? Daniel reacts to it. But it probably wasn't the reaction that we think, or maybe that we would take, but it was the one that his critics knew that he would. Notice it says there in Daniel 6:10, and in his upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Sometimes laws are passed, and we have to modify our behavior. For example, I moved from Illinois to Ohio back in, 1993 or so, 91. And sometime a little bit after that, I kept on hearing this click it or ticket stuff. Click it or ticket. And I'm like, what in the world? What are they talking about? Click it or ticket. And I kept on hearing it. And then I started seeing bumper stickers with it. I started seeing bumper magnets for it. And I started hearing commercials about it. And I asked somebody, I said, what in the world is all this they're talking about? And they said, well, it's a seatbelt law. They passed a seatbelt law in the state of Ohio. And as of this date, if you don't buckle up, and they catch you, you're going to get a ticket. I'm like, oh, well, I don't have to worry about that. And the person said, what do you mean you don't have to worry about it? Well, it wasn't what they were thinking. What they were thinking was, he's not going to buckle his seatbelt. No, actually, what I was thinking is back to when I got my driver's license back in 1983. Illinois had already passed that law. Matter of fact, it passed at the time when I was getting my license. I got my license just before they passed that law. Click it or ticket. I heard all that back in 1983. And I thought, well, that's strange, but they passed that law and you're expected to modify your behavior. The government has the right to do that. But there are times when the government passes laws that are unjust laws. What do we do about that? In Acts 5:29, Peter had this situation on his hands where he said we ought to obey God rather than men. They were commanded not to preach anymore about Jesus. And Peter said, oh no, we will continue to preach. They punished him for it, but they continued to do that. Daniel trusted in God before. He was not about to give up in trusting in God now. That's one thing that I want you to think about, the decision that you made. There's a preacher back several years ago by the name of Gus Nichols. Some of you recognize that name, some of you have no idea. But he was talking one time about why can't we get people to come to the services? They'll come on Sunday morning, but they won't come on Sunday night. Why won't they do that? And he was talking to people about it, and he said, you know what, 50 years ago, I already made that decision. He said, me and my wife, we don't have to sit down and debate whether or not we're going to go to church on Sunday night. We never have that discussion. It's just whenever the time comes, we get dressed, we gather our stuff, and we head to the building. And he said, why do you do that? Well, 50 years ago, I became a Christian. And when we became Christians, that decision was made. There is no this debating in our minds whether or not we're going to do the right thing or not. Or people do that. Every service probably comes up. Are we going to go to church tonight? Are we really going to go to Bible class tonight? Are we really going to do this? Are we really going to give money to the church instead of using it for our vacation? Are we really, on and on it goes. be very careful not to allow yourself to fall into bad habits. You can watch them. People will come, and then all of a sudden, they're not there on Sunday nights anymore. Get worried about them. Try to encourage them. Hopefully they reform. Hopefully they correct themselves. But sometimes, now they're not there Wednesday nights either. Pretty soon they're not in Bible classes anymore. Pretty soon they're missing a Sunday here or there. Pretty soon they're just missing. What happened? They allowed circumstances, they allowed things to crowd God out. And maybe you're doing that. And if you're doing that, stop it. Stop it and change course. Get back to what you need to do. Let me ask you this question. Are you trying to do the bare minimum to be counted as a Christian? You ever notice people like that? Let's just, you're in work and, you work at a place, I don't care what it is. You pick any place you want. But, you may come across in your time, you may come across a person and you might say, you know what that person does? They do the bare minimum just to keep from getting fired. That's all they do is the bare minimum. I wish they would get serious about their job. Well, how about this? Are you looking to do the bare minimum to be counted as a Christian? Daniel wasn't like that. Daniel wasn't like that. His reaction was consistency. Well, that gives rise to verses 11 through 15. That gives rise to a predicament. When the schemers saw Daniel do what they knew he was going to do, the busybodies went, and what did they do? They went and snitched. They went and tattled. They go to the king, they asked about the decree he signed, which they had requested. I'm sort of baffled by this. They're the ones that set this up. And you sort of wonder, is at any point in time that Darius is going to go, you guys are the ones that created this predicament. Yeah, he will. It's coming. In verse 12, it says, have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast in the den of lions? And he says, yeah, I sure did. And he confirms that he did so. He even goes so far as to say, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter, verse 12. He confirms it. And then they say this, they say, one of the captives of Judah, what's that mean? He's not one of us. He violated that decree, not once, not twice, but 3 times a day. He has done that. So Darius, you know what? He becomes angry, but he wasn't angry at Daniel. No, he was really upset with himself. He tries to get out of the trap, but the hunters are not going to let him get free. They're not going to let Daniel off the hook. They're not going to let Darius off the hook. They were pretty brazen when they reminded him in verse 15, know, O king, that this is the law of the Medes and the Persians, then no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. Pretty brazen about that, aren't they? Darius is really upset. So here comes the punishment, 16 through 23, the punishment. Darius had no choice. Once the law was signed, a king could not change or alter the law. But notice when he has Daniel put in there, in verse 16, he makes this astonishing statement. Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. That's Darius saying it to Daniel. Now, think about that. He has Daniel placed in the lion's den. He has a stone to cover the entrance. He has it sealed with his signet ring and all the signet rings of his lords. Can you imagine that? Use your imagination for a little bit. He puts that there, and you have your ring, and he probably had those conspirators. I'm sure he did. And and I don't know how it was, but I sort of imagine like there'd be a thing of clay there, almost like Play-Doh, I guess. I don't know. And he pushed his ring in there, and he probably had the 2 other governors come and do it, and I'm sure they were just like, they just probably rubbed it right in there. He's good as dead. Darius goes to his palace. He refuses entertainment. He fasts. He cannot sleep. The first thing he does in the morning, he goes to that lion's den. He cries for Daniel. He opens up, cries for him, and says, Daniel, servant of the living God, verse 20, Daniel 6. Has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And I imagine when he heard Daniel's voice, It had to have been like sweet music to him when he said, there in verses 21 and 22, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, and also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Darius knew that. So Daniel is brought up out of the lion's den, and he's examined, and they found no injury to him at all. You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That was their Babylonian names, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. It was their real names. But you remember, they put them in that fiery furnace. Remember that? And when they take them out of there, they said they didn't have any damage to them at all. They didn't even smell like smoke. Didn't smell like smoke? They were in a fiery furnace. How can that happen? I can't walk across anywhere near a fire pit without smelling like smoke as soon as I get away from it. God delivered them. God delivered Daniel. There was no injury to him. Remember I told you about, does Darius not realize what these other governors, what their plot was? I mean, was he that stupid? Did he not realize? Was he just aloof? Sometimes people think their bosses are stupid. Or maybe parents, sometimes their children think they're dumb. Sometimes when we grow up, we realize our parents are a whole lot smarter than we realized. Darius was not dumb. Next comes the justice and the praise, verses 24 through 28. The wrath of Darius is extended to the conspirators and their families. They are thrown into the den of lions, where the lions would have the mastery of them. That was the punishment. That was the justice. You might think, well, how could he do that? How could he do that? Did God sanction that? Well, Darius is the one who did it. They were devoured so quickly and furiously. In verse 24, it says that the lions broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Devoured. You see, these conspirators, they set a trap. They set a trap. Daniel, he walked right into the trap. He knew what they'd done. He saw that they signed it, but he wasn't going to alter his faithfulness to God. So he walked right into the trap. They sprung the trap on him. It didn't work out the way they thought. Remember this proverb. In Proverbs 26:27, it says, whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and he who rolls a stone will have it rolled back on him. I'm sure you could think of instances in your life, or maybe in the news or things like that, where people had set a trap for somebody, and the trap actually ensnared them. Conspirators, haters, schemers. What about us? How do we do? Darius, he decides, he doesn't just stop there. He decides to issue a decree. His new decree, it says, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. Can you imagine such a thing? For he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues. No doubt who he's talking about there. And he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. In Daniel 6:28, the last passage there, it says that, so Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Notice the reference to both Darius and Cyrus there. Daniel 6:28. Daniel was blessed for what he went through under very difficult circumstances. He was elevated after different circumstances. People became jealous of him. They entrapped him. The reaction to it, the predicament that it caused, the punishment that he had to go through, the justice that was meted out. There are people that maybe they're not as fortunate as Daniel. There are times that people went to go, God told them to go do this and that, and a lot of people died. They died being faithful to the Lord. The question is, I want to ask you is, what about your faithfulness? If you're not faithful to the Lord, why? I want you to really give that some serious thought. Why aren't you faithful to Him? What stops you from doing that? What made you quit? And I just want you to be honest with yourself and just ask yourself, what were the circumstances that caused that? And write them down. I'm not asking you to send them to me, just for yourself. Ask yourself, I quit, we'll put it this way. I quit going to church because of, write them all down. And just set it aside for a little bit. Then time goes by, maybe a day or two. Take a look at that list again. And think about it. Think about the weight, each one of those points that you made as an argument for quitting God, quitting Christ, and quitting His church. Give it some serious thought. I've read studies in the past, I'm not saying these are by the Church of Christ or anything, but I've heard, and know that it's true, that a lot of people quit going to church because of one event. Not all of them, but a lot of them because of one event. You know what that one event is? They were relocated from their job. Their job forced them to be relocated. What happens when you're relocated? Everything. Have you ever had to move? Some people never have to move. I've had to move multiple times. Tired of moving. But I'll have to move again. Time tells. We're all on the move. But the thing about moving you have to do, it's more than just unloading the truck. I was talking to my mom just last night, and she was talking about, how much of a burden it is to move. And you have people that are good people, they try to help you, but they really don't know where you want this box or that box. So you actually end up almost moving twice. You pack everything up, put it on the truck, and they unload it. Then the real moving begins. I got to move this box to this room, this box to that room, this box over here. Well, you know what? That takes time. That takes a lot of time. Well, we're really tired. I would fix supper, but I can't even find any dishes to do it with. Okay, well, we'll go out to eat and get something. We've got a new job. We're starting. This is exciting. We'll do that. So we've gone to do that. Go and eat, come back. Guess what? More work to do. You know what? Where are we going to go eat? Well, we're going to have to look that up. Let's see what they have here. Well, today it's a lot easier to do that. Just drive around, you find a place. Well, then you have to establish your address. Then you have to establish your utilities and your phone. You know what? All that takes time. That takes time. More and more stuff. And if you're the person that's starting a new job, guess what you have to do? You have to go into a new job, and you have to learn everything. Everything from how do I do this job, even to the things that we underestimate, like, is there a bathroom in this place, and where is it? Everything is new and takes time to learn. We know what often happens to people? They get so consumed in that, they don't have time to look for the church. They may not even know if there's a church in town. We'll do it next week. We'll do it next week. We'll do it next week. Before you know it, they're on a different path than they ever sought out to do. Daniel didn't make that mistake, and hopefully this story has been a reminder to you to think about the importance of being faithful to God all of your life. Thanks for watching our program. Before we close our program today, we'd like to take a moment and review this roadmap to heaven with you, since the matter is so serious. There are many incorrect set of directions out there, and sadly so many people are following them. For example, some people have been given wrong turns. They believe things such as faith only, works only, or grace only. Or some attempt to change the order of the turns, being baptized before they even believe. Some people fail to realize what point they are on the map. Don't even open their Bibles yet, and they think they're saved already. As a person travels in a car or takes a hike, has to follow the proper directions, so we must follow the proper directions to heaven. Let's take a look at the directions on our roadmap to heaven here. You have to look at these passages in your Bible for yourself. We'll just list the steps, the turns on the way. First is to believe or to have faith. And then number 2, to repent, to turn away from sin. Number 3 is to confess that Jesus is the Son of God. Number 4 is immersion, or to be baptized, which is a burial in water to have your sins washed away. And then you're added to the church by the Lord, not by a group of people, or not by giving some kind of testimonial experience or things like that. And then once you're added, you need to serve and worship the Lord faithfully all the days of your life. And the key word's faithfully. You don't waver. And that's very important. We need to keep in mind, too, that in Noah's day there was a big flood, and only people in the ark were saved from the flood. The same is true today. There is no salvation outside the Lord's church. Where are you on the roadmap to heaven? Thanks for watching our program. Please let us know if we can assist you with further information for your journey.